Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my dad always told me fast game's a good game, so let's move on to the next panel. Not so much a fast game, but hopefully playing the long game. The next session asks the question, how can Greater Western Sydney nurture local heroes and secure global talent? Bit of a theme for the day. I'd like to invite the panellists to the stage. Gary Dawson, Vice President, Strategy and Communication, Thales Australia. John Lydon, Economic Commissioner, Greater Cities Commission. The second most famous Brett in the room, Brett Newman, Chief Executive Officer of the City of Parramatta, Kelly Stanford, Director, Department of Education, Aboriginal Outcomes and Partnerships, Kimber Wiley, and our provocateur, Kirsten Andrews, Vice Principal, External Relations, the University of Sydney. This session explores how Greater Western Sydney can retain and leverage its growing pipeline of young talent. Part of the brief was also to ask, what role can town and gown partnerships play? Before this event, I hadn't heard that expression before, but our chairman, Christopher Brown, assures me it's a real thing. So I'm positive that if anyone can unpack what that means, Kirsten Andrews can. So with that, please make our next panel welcome.
Thanks, Brett. And I understand that there are extra points for how many times we can mention the term town and gown, according to Chris Brown. So it's been a matter of discussion. But on a more serious nature, I'm here because I think that Christopher and the Dialogue have been supportive of the way universities engage across Western Sydney, and I think that it's been very exciting to watch the way universities engage, but more are welcomed by partners through industry and government, and particularly the people on the stage here with me, in terms of securing global talent. So we're going to solve the labour shortage and the talent pipeline between now and lunch, everybody. So we'll just try to solve that and hope that people aren't too hungry. So on this floor, I'd like to start with Kelly, if I may. I'm not sure, Brett, did you go through that? Kelly is the Director of the Department of Education, Aboriginal Outcomes and Partnerships, and I'm sure everyone in the room is looking to make sure that we take advantage of the significant talent we have across Western Sydney as this exciting place develops. And I wanted to ask you a question about all of the Sydney area universities are at least considering, if not developing, strategies to engage and have a presence in Western Sydney. I'm interested in, as a provocative question, what do you think universities need to consider when developing these strategies, and how is Western Sydney different to other employment markets? And what do you think we need to consider when developing an education to work strategy for workers from and in Western Sydney? And to Christopher's point, particularly in relation to town and gown strategies.
Thanks for starting off with such an easy question to answer. I appreciate it. Kimber Wiley is the Centre for Aboriginal Excellence in Western Sydney, for those of you that don't know. And we were a Premier's commitment back in 2015, and it took a little while to come together and come to fruition. So we have been developing partnerships and engaging with universities to try and find a way to get ahead of the game and support our universities to start to engage with our young people in school and start to plant the seed while they are young and support them and connect them through all the many different pathways that eventually lead them to university and meaningful employment. Now that's a challenge because when we're speaking about our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in Western Sydney, we need to meet them where they are currently at. And that is, there is diversity, but we generally have a lower baseline with which we're starting from. And so that means that we are really playing a long game. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got some wonderful partnerships that are established with Western Sydney University. I'd love to be able to partner with more universities, but where there's some really exciting initiatives being led by the universities, not by Kimber Wiley, but being led by the universities where they're starting to create those relationships with our young people now. So they are really looking to grow their own talent, but it's all based on the strength of relationships, creating that trust, really exciting our young people and showing them that they have potential and how they will work in partnership with them to reach that potential. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. I think I've answered part of it. I think there was two parts, and I don't know what the gown and town thing is,
Well, I
but
think
I've
the answer
mentioned
is,
it.
what can universities do to help? And I think you've probably given us a challenge there, which is helpful. Was there anything else that you think we need to do?
I think that is a really wonderful initiative about creating the relationships with really young people. Like I'm talking about going to primary schools, not waiting until they're at year 10 and year 11 and 12, and start really earlier.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. To the next point, many of you may know that the City of Parramatta has done quite a lot of work to set itself up as an education destination, and that's been led by Brett Newman, the Chief Executive Officer. I wanted to ask, in terms of Western Sydney has made great strides in becoming an attractive destination for employers and employees, and that's created the movement. But beyond economic growth and good coffee, what do you think is the key to that, and what do we need to do that's not being done at the moment to nurture employees to stay in Western Sydney, either if they've grown up here or if they've arrived from elsewhere around the globe?
Thanks, Kirsten. Another easy one. Gosh. Maybe the best way to tackle that question is thinking about, it's hard to talk broadly about Western Sydney because I think there are many different sub-districts. But I think if you think about it from a district basis or a sub-city basis, what are the competitive advantages of each of the districts? And how do we support those competitive advantages? So the competitive advantages or the core sectors for the metropolis will be different from Parramatta or the central city, which will be different from Liverpool. So, for example, in the central city, we've got core sectors where we probably have competitive advantages: education, health, hopefully health innovation and research, and white-collar services. So what do we need to do to support those core services? And there'll be different sectors for different districts. And then what are the things that the cities and also the tertiary education providers need to provide to retain that talent within those districts, which has a whole number of social and community benefits. So I think a couple of things. Firstly, making our post-school courses flexible and tailored and supporting the sectors in which you have competitive advantages. So that's a sector and an education lens on it. And then secondly, from a city perspective, what are the things that the cities need to do to support people to live and work in their communities? So they're things like transport, different modes of transport, more localised active transport, things like light rail, active transport, bicycle ways. And then probably most importantly, housing and affordable housing. We may not solve that one this afternoon, but we've got to start that journey. So, and then of course, having a culture which supports and attracts people into your community so that they can stay, work and study.
Thank you. Some helpful suggestions there. I now wanted to go to Gary, who's the Vice President Strategy and Communications for Thales, because I think we all know that through the pandemic, many global employees went back to their home countries, and many foreign workers went home, as Australians returned back here. But as we're coming out, we're experiencing how business and employment practices aren't the same. Are multinational companies likely to continue to recruit from a worldwide pool? And what do you think that means for us as we plan the development of our city?
Yeah, great question. I think the short answer is yes and yes. It's got to be an and, not an or. And you're right. COVID sort of broke the model in terms of skilled migration. I think certainly our experience, where we routinely would recruit specialist skills that were in short supply in Australia, we'd look globally and we'd bring them in under skilled migration visas to work for 3 or 4 years on a project, and almost invariably, almost 100% of the time, those people would end up taking out permanent residency and citizenship and building the skills base of the country. Now, COVID broke that. It's not a criticism of the COVID measures. It's absolutely the right thing to do, but the closed borders meant we couldn't do that. And as you've pointed out, Kirsten, a lot of those people who were here couldn't get a visa for their spouse, for their children. Very difficult time, and a lot of them did return to their home countries. and the borders are open now, but they're not coming. You know, that the hangover of that period is very real, and it's very, very difficult for us to recruit globally, and we need to. It will take years though. Matt Keane this morning said he expects it'll be 2 years before we get back to anything like normality. That's probably true. So it does throw the focus more on what can we do locally, right? How can we build the skills, and we do that anyway, because it's an and not an or. And to add to the points that have already been made, including the critical one around this is a long game. You know, developing highly skilled engineers or software developers or project managers or systems integrators is a long game. I think what companies like mine have to offer boils down to interesting work, and we do a lot of work in defence industry. We have a lot of collaborations, including with Sydney Uni and other universities, on really cutting edge, world leading technologies, and I think that's a key part of it. I mean, Thales has about 3,800 people in Australia, half of them in New South Wales, almost 1,000 in Western Sydney. You may not have heard of the company unless you drove down Victoria Road and have seen the sign in between the Bunnings and the Servo. But in that facility in Rydalmere, we research and develop and manufacture the world's most advanced sonar sensors for submarines. And this is a 20-year research partnership with Sydney Uni and Defence Science and Technology Group, and the young graduates that we hire into there just love it. They love the idea of working on very advanced technology that's saving lives and contributing to a national cause, and exports. We export from there all around the world. So I think interesting work is at the heart of it.
Thanks for that. And it might be to the detriment of the graduates working on the partnership with you from my own home institution, but if there was a magic bullet a lever you could play in terms of skilled migration overnight and make it easier, would that be a change to the way we're using migration, something that you'd like to be able to sell to potential employees? Is that a lifestyle option, or is there something that you would say to the new Prime Minister that he should do overnight if he could? If he had a magic wand and was prepared to use it in your favour, what would he do?
Look, you absolutely need all that. Like, COVID's changed the way we work, right? So flexibility and diversity and all those things are critical. I think to accelerate the shift back to something like normal, we are going to need some effort, some campaigns, some recruitment, some effort by governments around the world, by our government around the world to promote the opportunities here, and also accelerating the visa application and approval process, because it's pretty woeful.
Meanwhile, we'll do all we can to produce the great quality local graduates as best we possibly can. So that's a good time to turn to a question I had for John. From a Greater Cities Commission perspective, in order to increase the potential workforce, companies are going to have to start training employees possibly to a greater extent than they're doing now, whether that's in partnership with established education providers or not. What are your ideas on how industry, education sector and the government might be able to work together to achieve labour shortages? Can we identify with some specificity what the labour shortages might be, and is there anything we can do, or is it we're just going to sort of clumsily lump together? And is there something specific to Western Sydney in that?
Yeah, okay, well, it's a good question as well. Look, task number one for all of us is more, better, more sustainable jobs in Western Sydney, more resilient jobs, higher quality jobs. And to do that, you need more, better, more sustainable, more resilient, globally competitive industries. So I think what we can all do is look at where they're going to come from. How can Western Sydney, and to a bigger extent the Greater Cities region, build a sustainable comparative advantage globally? Just like we might have had in mining and agriculture in the past. What's the next one? What are the next ones going to be? Now, I'm an economist, right? So economists don't give you good news very often, especially not at the moment. I'm going to give you good news, because there's two areas that are emerging really fast where we can have global comparative advantage. I'm not going to mention sectors, although we have others mentioned advanced manufacturing and medtech today. I'm going to say two words. First one, knowledge. Second one, interaction. That is where Western Sydney's comparative advantage can come from. All the knowledge jobs that range in those sectors where we are at the, if you're a design engineer, the smile curve, right? If you think of a product's life cycle, the value added is at the start, design, development, research, and is at the end, is the servicing, the use of data, redesign. So it's in those areas that knowledge is key. And the other one in interaction, the interaction skills, problem solving, collaboration, putting things together. Western Sydney has all the raw materials for that. And we have universities, we have research institutes, we also have a lot of smart Year 12 kids. You know, we heard about it from Rachel Powell at James Roos, but we're also at a coffee with Deputy MD of Clontarf, who has 10,000 Indigenous Year 12 kids going through that program. We've got the raw materials. So back to your question, what can employers do? Well, it's all about doing it together. We know where the comparative advantage is going to be. We've got to get the government, the universities, and the potential employees, be they students, be they later in life people wanting to change careers, working on the skills that we need to build the comparative advantage. If we do that, it builds the comparative advantage even more, even further. So it's committing to those areas, putting together the programs, doing it together, getting people through those programs.
Thank you. That's a pretty exciting vision, I think. Can I ask a follow-up to that? If we were to realise your ambition that you've articulated there, if you've got a student, I don't know enough about your life to know whether or not you have children at this age, but say you had a student in Year 5 or thinking, what do I want to be when I grow up? What kind of area would you encourage them to take a look at, and allowing for them nurturing their own talents, of course?
Yeah.
What would you ask them to take a look at as a future?
So mine are a bit beyond the Year 5, but they're certainly beyond taking Dad's advice on anything right now. But look, it's all about getting exposure. And isn't that great? Where we are now, and we've got Bradfield, and we can jump on a train, and in 30 minutes we've got Tech Central and the Quantum Terminal, and we've got Westmead, and we've got all these assets here. I would encourage and it is Year 5, not just 11 and 12 kids, to get out and go and see what's happening at the Quantum Terminal, go and see what's happening at the WIMA, you know, and just love that. And that ought to, what you can see, you might want to be. Now, we've got our bit to do as well, everybody. That is putting on, funding, supporting the demand-led programs that are going to get people into those jobs when they get to the end of the school time.
Terrific, thank you. That's probably a good time to come back to Kelly. Is that the kind of thing we should be considering for your clients, taking them on work experience of the airport to see where they might work and what their future might look like?
I don't know if you could see me nodding all the way through that response. It is exactly what we need. The exposure piece is really important. If you can't see something, you don't know that that is what you want to be. I was really excited to hear about the exciting opportunities that you offer, and I wonder how many of our young people in Western Sydney are aware that that is something that is available to them. So if I had, following on from an earlier speaker about putting out there my wish list, it would be for a regionally based workforce development strategy that also takes into account the unique needs of any of our diversity and equity groups, and to make sure that that's a really focused strategy within the strategy. Otherwise, we will leave them behind. Why it is great to celebrate those achievements like those that are operating with Clontarf, which is fantastic. We still do have a Premier's priority, which is to increase the HSC attainment of our Aboriginal population, and we're not doing well with that target, unfortunately. So there is some work to do, and that was what I meant by my earlier comment about meeting them where they are. But that doesn't mean that we don't go ahead with these really exciting opportunities to show them that this is what is available, and then we just need to provide that support to help them to reach their full potential.
Terrific, thank you. I liked your idea of a regionally based workforce strategy, so if I can leap on that for a moment and come back to Brett. You've articulated some of the specialist areas for Parramatta and Westmead, which I think makes sense. Is it possible to come up with even allowing for local specificity in Liverpool and Penrith and Parramatta across the Western Sydney. But do you think it's possible to come up with such specificity for each area, and could we do that collectively, do you think?
Yes.
Great, okay, done.
I'll go.
Who needs to lead it?
Yeah,
Is that a
I
local
think,
government-led thing or a state government, Pedro?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a combination. I think if we can do it, maybe two observations related to that. The first one is, I think universities and other tertiary education providers probably need to think differently about how we work together. And I would say thinking about complementary education services rather than competition is incredibly important. There's no point, us trying to build campuses in each district or each city, and there's no point everyone providing the same courses. It will be a much more powerful model if we think strategically about what are the education services that we provide students and the workforce that complement the sectors, and the universities and organisations like TAFE complement each other. Very, very different model from friendly competition, but I think critically important if we want to be successful. Secondly, I'll build on Kelly's comment. I would amplify that across our entire community. The demographic and diversity of Western Sydney community, and I think the Minister touched on this, is really important to remember and reflect that it's different. Over 50% of people in Western Sydney, their first language at home is not English. We have the youngest population, it's already relatively well educated, and we have young families. So thinking about what education is provided and how it's delivered to those communities, particularly if collaboration is one of our competitive advantages, is going to be valuable as well. If we want to keep women, young families, providing education to them so that we can provide them with jobs, then we're going to have to deliver those education services differently.
I think you're right. If I can share without over-disclosing, the University of Sydney recently had a conversation with an international health research company that we're hoping to attract here, and one of our major selling points was indeed the diversity of the Western Sydney community as an opportunity to research, because if you can make your clinical research work here, you can come up with something with worldwide impact, but given particularly the ethnic diversity. I think it makes it such a great kind of experiment in terms of looking at what really works in terms of health advances. I've got a few questions on the Slido here, and the first one is for Brett, which is, I think you've partly answered, but it'd be good to see if you had anything to add. What role can local government play in retaining local talent?
A couple of ways. Obviously, as an employer, and supporting local talent, having positive employment policies around attraction and retention of local talent, but also providing development for them. So one of the key things I think all local governments can do, including us, can actually invest in its people and invest in their development. Particularly the profile of your workforce is not tertiary qualified. It's probably secondary. So investing in their education and providing them with opportunities, not just in local council, but in local industry, in the community, I think is one thing we can do. And the other thing we can do to nurture and retain local talent in the city or community in which you operate is actually to work with other stakeholders, recognising that you're not going to do it on your own. As Kirsten knows, we've developed an alliance of all universities in Parramatta or the central city, really, to work out how we can work together to attract and retain students in Parramatta in the central city. So that's thinking differently about your role.
Thank you. The next question, I'm not sure who it's for, so I'll leave it open to the panel who'd like to answer, but attracting talent is often about place features. How can we harness our assets like the Parramatta River to promote the central river city as a place to be? But I would also put a challenge that we might look at some natural features further afield, if there's a suggestion. I know Christopher Brown often talks about having people swimming in the Nepean River a bit more frequently. I don't know if an after-work dip is the way to sell people. Does anyone have any ideas? John, do you?
Well, it's one of the things that the Greater Cities Commission is all about, which is the placemaking, because particularly knowledge work, but also development, is a contact sport, right? And it's about bumping into people, it's those collisions, it's the exchange of ideas, and it's also about losing a bit of our vulnerability by swimming in the Nepean River. Not today, though, it's probably a bit cold. So absolutely, those place features have to draw people together, draw different people together, and then help a lot of the circulation of ideas, but also aspirations, the mixing. One of the huge hidden advantages of Western Sydney, both Central River and Western Parklands, is the diversity that you have here. If I was a Silicon Valley company, and I speak to a few, and I wanted to put my Asia headquarters somewhere, I'm certainly not going to put it in Shanghai right now, certainly not Hong Kong. Singapore's a little bit risky. What about Western Sydney? Because I have so many different cultures, so many different languages, an understanding of how they all work, and it's very accessible, actually, to all those places. So that's the kind of thing you start to inspire if people are playing together, working together, and bumping into each other, taking advantage of our beautiful places.
Good point. Can I suggest to you one of the challenges of, I think Dublin is our competitor in this space in some areas. I'm not sure, those of you may have seen a campaign run by the Irish government. They call it Tech Life Dublin, and they pay people to recruit tech jobs. They're aggressively teaching them. There's a sort of commission if you can recruit people. But the most important part of that campaign is that they talk about the quality of life. And I know that in Sydney we've tended to say the beaches, but when I first came across this, it was sort of during our very wet March, and I thought we can't even say, it doesn't rain in Sydney as our competitive advantage. But I think when you look at cities that have not been, some of our traditional competitors, Singapore, Shanghai, are becoming less attractive, but there are sort of new emergent competitors, and when I look at the Dublin website, it makes me want to visit, if not move. And I just think, are there other emergent competitors in this space, or is there anything we could be learning from what other people are doing, particularly post-pandemic, that we should be copying their ideas? Anyone else?
Well, look, I think Sydney, there's no doubt it's a great, it's got a great reputation and as a very livable place. There's no doubt about that globally. And certainly for us, just to echo John's point, the great attraction of Western Sydney is just the size of the labour pool and the diversity of it, and particularly when you're in a sector that's really grappling with disruptive technological change. Mind you, every sector is grappling with that, I guess. That's a huge asset. But I think we're just right at the moment, we're suffering from that overhang of the COVID effect, and that's making it harder to. It's not that they don't like people overseas. They like the idea of Sydney. I just think it's harder to get them to commit.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. We've got a question here about how does the New South Wales government engage with the voices of young people from across the state, including Western Sydney, to ensure that their aspirations are matched. So I'll put that to John and Brett, because I know you both do a bit of consultation with young people. Kelly may have a view as well.
Well, certainly in the Greater Cities Commission now, as was Greater Sydney Commission, there's a youth panel, which every commission meeting we hear from them.
Great.
And it's a bit like apprenticeship. We're actually getting good apprenticeship from the next generation, right? Not just from the last generation. They're the people we're building it for. Voices are important.
Fantastic. Does City of Parramatta have something similar?
Yes, I think picking up on the last question as well, what do people care about? They care about the environment and sustainability. What attracts people? Culture, community and culture. So coordinated programming of culture, cultural events, cultural institutions, investment. So we need to continue to invest in our environment. We need to continue to invest in our cultural programs, because investment in our cultural programs will attract all of our community, but particularly youth. And then the programming, both education but also cultural and community programming, needs to speak to our youth, and then we need to listen to them, and we listen to them through various forums, including, and frankly, it's social media. Don't bother surveying them, as we both discovered.
Yes.
Don't necessarily try and talk to them. Really leverage and use social media.
I had an argument internally with somebody who said, we need to get it out on social media, we need to get it to our students, we need to talk to them on Facebook. And I had to say, I'm sorry, Facebook is where their parents are. You need to go on a thing called TikTok to talk to our students, and that we're finding that as a means of communication for those of us who are a bit older, it takes some adaptability required, but it's worth doing. So, to your point, Kelly, in terms of engaging with the people that you advocate for in the planning of our city, how could we be better at listening to them, do you think?
By first creating a relationship with them. Quite often, Kimberwali is asked to assist to facilitate those relationships. And one of the advantages that we have at Kimberwali is that we do have a beautiful place that we can offer to support those relationships. And then it is listening to them by not having a one-off conversation, but a continuing dialogue. And checking with them if you have heard them correctly, and they'll tell you quite clearly, including advising us that Facebook is for the old people and the parents, and we've learnt that lesson ourselves. So that would be my suggestion in learning to listen to them, is by first creating a relationship.
That's great advice, thank you. The timer at the bottom of the screen here is telling me that we're out of time. I'm sorry we haven't gotten to all the questions, but I do think that my panellists have helped us answer the question on how we might nurture local heroes and securing global talent as promised before lunchtime. So would you join me in thanking them for their contribution?